Member Portman, you are recognized for your questions.
Thank you. Deficit reduction. Nobody wants to talk about it much anymore, but it's incredibly important. And as a percent of our GDP, our debt continues to grow, which is very concerning to me and to a lot of economists who look at where we're headed as a country. And OMB is where deficit reduction should start. You know, that's the entity that is supposed to say no when federal agencies and departments come to you for increases in their budget, and when the entitlement programs are at risk. You know, you should be the ones to, in my view, be the guardians of some fiscal restraint. And so along those lines, during COVID, we had to spend a lot of money, and there were 5 bills passed in the Trump administration. Then, of course, the massive legislation, $1.9 trillion, the largest bill ever passed by Congress, biggest appropriation ever, roughly a year ago. I'm wondering, as we now work through COVID and we have all these programs in place, whether it's time to start focusing on those deficits. CBO recently projected that deficits would be 13.4% of GDP for fiscal year 2022. Wow. That's concerning. So what are your views about that? Ms. Young, I'll start with you. Is it time for us to focus again on deficit reduction now that we are getting to the point where we have put in place huge amounts for COVID and we're making progress with regard to the latest COVID variant?
Thank you, Senator Portman. We may disagree on some of the particulars of the President's budget sent up earlier this year or even future ones, but something this President is very serious about, and I hope you take some solace in this as we look at deficit and debt reduction, is he showed a path to pay for and offset all of his permanent proposals. I worked on the other side of budgets for many years over several administrations. That was a novel idea, that we should offset our permanent proposals. We may not agree on those offsets, but the President did put forward a proposal that did that.
Yeah, well, there were no offsets in the $1.9 trillion. It was done a year ago, and not a single Republican vote, the largest appropriation ever. You're referring to BBB and the fact that the President wants to spend additional money on stimulus, but in this case, he has tax increases to go along with it.
Senator, a version of Build Back Better was absolutely a part of the budget at the time, called Jobs and Families Plan, and you're absolutely right. There were proposals in which to pay for those efforts.
I would note that I agree with former Secretary of the Treasury, Larry Summers, and many other economists who said at the time a year ago that adding that kind of stimulus at a time when the economy was growing, which it turns out they were right, it was growing and has grown, would cause inflation that would be devastating for families across our country, and we're seeing it. It seems to me that more stimulus is not the way to go, but instead for us to figure out how to get inflation down by expanding our economic growth at the same time, not adding more stimulus so that the supply can catch up. Any thoughts about that, either one of you?
I'm happy to talk about the economic picture writ large. We just saw numbers that showed last year largest growth since 1984 in GDP, 5.7%. We saw unemployment rate at 3.9%. Most jobs added by President, over 6 million. But you're absolutely right. These inflationary price pressures we have to tackle. This administration is looking at supply chain shortages as one way to tackle that. We're also trying to increase competition in the marketplace. We believe that will also bring down price pressures for the American people. But one thing you also reference is Build Back Better. One thing that bill or versions of that bill do are make investments to take down pressures like bringing down the cost of prescription drugs.
Yeah, well, we're just going to differ, I think, on the need for more stimulus, and I think it's obvious now when you look at the numbers that Larry Summers and others were right. A lot of us who said the economy is growing, and dumping more stimulus on top of that is like putting fuel on a fire, and it's going to result in huge inflationary numbers. I don't think anybody thought the inflation would be quite as bad as it is. But to my constituents, you know, when they go to the grocery store, go to the gas pump, they're in shock. And yes, some wage gains are occurring, but not keeping up with inflation. In terms of oversight, Chairman Peters and I, as you know, want to work with OMB. We sometimes make requests for documents, and as you know, I'm frustrated that our documents requests related to the administration's response to COVID-19 have not been forthcoming. Almost a year ago in March, we sent the request. We've received a few, mostly already public documents in response. We've also got another request into you for a national security-related document. That was in September. I know you're aware of these because we've talked about them, Ms. Young. Can you commit to producing these documents in the next couple of weeks?
Senator, I believe you hopefully received ARP balances, and we absolutely commit. We should show you what Congress has provided. And the other report, I promise you I would look into that and shake that loose. If there is another classified report, I'm happy to work with your office. Whatever we can provide, whatever counsel says is available to others, I believe we should be providing that information.
Well, we don't have the documents we're looking for yet with regard to COVID-19, so I'll double check on that. But if you can commit today, within 2 weeks, to get us those documents, and with regard to the other topic, we will follow up offline. But again, we're just frustrated that we can't get information as authorizers. We're trying to do the proper oversight, but it's impossible if we don't have the information. Ms. Young, during your confirmation as Deputy Director of OMB, your response to the question that was posed for the record regarding the Hyde Amendment caused me and a lot of my Republican colleagues, all of them in fact, grave concern. The Hyde Amendment, as you know, is longstanding bipartisan agreement not to allow federal taxpayer dollars to be used for abortions. By the way, it's something that now President, but then Senator Biden supported when he was in the United States Senate. This allows us to legislate much more productively, get things done in the healthcare space, and it's critical for respecting, in my view, the religious and ethical and moral beliefs of so many Americans. I'd like to give you an opportunity to clarify where you stand with regard to the Hyde Amendment.
Thank you for that, Senator. One, I commit to following the law of the land. Hyde, some version of Hyde, has been the law and carried in appropriations bills since the late 70s. As I've done over the last 10 months and will continue to do if confirmed, follow the law and certainly commit to not trying to weaken the Hyde Amendment if Congress chooses not to remove it from appropriations bills, not try to weaken it or not follow the law in any way.
Thank you. Ms. Colready, where do you stand with regard to the Hyde Amendment?
Thanks for that question, Senator. I will follow the law as enacted by Congress and signed by the President.
All right. My time's expired. I've got a lot of other questions, and hopefully we'll be able to get to some of those. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member Portman. Senator Hassan, you are recognized for your questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member Portman, for holding this hearing.